Hello and welcome to our Q&A. This is where you get to ask your burning questions and I will answer them for you. This week I've had a great question from Alison about which yeast to use, fresh or dried, when you are using them in your baking. So let's start with the differences between the two. Dried yeast is basically a freeze-dried version of fresh yeast. It comes in small little granules and comes also packaged in little sachets, and most of them, those sachets are about 7 grams, which is usually about the quantity that you need in each of your in a standard recipe. So you use them all. You can also buy dried yeast in canisters or larger containers. If you don't use it all, which quite often you won't, it's best stored in an airtight container or jar in your fridge, and there it will last for at least up to a year and you can use it whenever you need. The best thing about dried yeast is it's easy to find. It's available at the supermarket in the baking aisle. It is super easy to use. You can add it directly to your dry ingredients before you add your wet, and there's no need to activate it, and it's incredibly reliable. I've never met a dried yeast that hasn't worked for me, so that's a brilliant thing to keep in mind. When it comes to fresh yeast, it's available from selected delicatessens and specialty food stores. Usually comes in blocks, either large kilo blocks or if they've cut it down into smaller pieces. It'll have a beautiful pale colour. It will have quite a pleasant yeasty aroma, and the texture of it will be like putty. As it ages, it becomes darker in colour, more pungent in aroma, but also it becomes drier and more crumbly. So you can usually tell when you buy it whether it's super fresh or not so fresh. If you buy it and it's really fresh, it will last well wrapped in your fridge for at least 2 weeks. If you're not going to use it immediately, I would recommend freezing it just in the portions that you're going to use it in snap-lock bags, and then you'll need to thaw it before you actually use it. When you go to use fresh yeast, you need to activate it first. So what I mean by this is combining it with a little bit of flour, a little bit of warm water, and a little bit of sugar, all of those proportions from your actual from the ingredients in your recipe, and then set it aside in a beautiful warm draft-free space for about 5 to 10 minutes. In cooler weather, you will need to possibly leave it for a little bit longer, but what will happen is it will activate, it will become quite spongy, and when it does that, it's telling you that it's fresh, it's ready to be used, and you can add it then directly to your wet ingredients before adding your dried. Now, when it comes to comparing them and using them in your baking, they are totally interchangeable. So the only thing that you do need to remember is that you need to use double the amount in weight of fresh yeast to dried yeast. So for example, if a recipe asks for 7 grams of dried yeast, you then have to use 14 grams of fresh yeast, which you would obviously crumble, combine with the other ingredients, a small amount of flour, warm water, and a little bit of sugar to activate it before you then use it. So you can see that dried yeast is super convenient. It's easy to have in your pantry and on hand. It's easily to get and it's incredibly reliable. So that's my go-to when I get to yeast, when it comes to using yeast. But when I'm making beautiful sort of Northern European style yeasted breads, I do tend to reach or go and buy some fresh yeast because I find that it just adds a beautiful layer of flavor, and it tends to have this beautiful effect on the texture of those sorts of breads and bakes as well. So, but other than that, it's quite hard to pick up the difference between the two, and as I said before, completely interchangeable. So hopefully, Alison, that has answered your question. If you've got a question that you would like me to answer, please pop it in the comments below and I'll answer it in coming weeks. I hope you have a great week, and I'll see you soon.